Without further ado, let me start the session itself, right? Um, I'm Ashwin. Have around close to 12 years of strategy consulting experience, worked with Bain and Company, started in Middle East and then also moved to the US. Then worked with Deloitte as a director, then worked with Goldman Sachs in their strategy team. What I do now is mentor and coach people, help folks like you get into top tier consulting firms. Um, I work with Leland, but also work with my own coaching platform, right? And what we will be doing today, the focus of today's session will be structuring, right? Um, just to cover a bit about me, right? You can find my profile on Leland and I have been working with professionals and students for almost 5 years now. 4 of it was part time. 1 year I've been working full time on helping people get into top tier consulting firms. Have helped almost 200 people actually get into top tier consulting firms across different locations, specifically the US, most of them in the US, right? Um, Now, let me get back into what we will be covering today, right? Today, the agenda is to cover what case structuring is, right? And we will be covering some key drills, right? Through which I will demonstrate to you how you can formulate a problem solving approach that is more logic driven, that is more messy, and that is more objective oriented, right? But let's start with understanding what a case structure is, right? When I start coaching, a lot of mentees have an incorrect view of what a case structure really is, right? Most of them have this view that a case structure is nothing but a list of buckets and sub buckets to throw at the interviewer, right? And Oftentimes these buckets and sub buckets will come from a casebook or will come from a certain YouTube video that they would have watched, right? But actually, right, in consulting, right, the way we look at an approach or a structure is the key areas of investigation, right, the key areas of analysis, right, that we will be conducting, right, in order to most efficiently answer the key question, right? So for example, if the question is about should we enter this new market, right? um, in that case, right, what are the key criteria that we will need to test, right, in order to answer whether we should enter the market or not, right? And those criteria could be in the form of, let's say, whether the market is attractive, right? A second criteria could be in the form of if we enter this market, will it make financial sense for us, right? Will we be able to recover the investment, right? The third criteria could be in the form of is it a strategic fit? Do we have the capabilities to enter this particular market? A fourth criteria could be in the form of can we mitigate and manage risks, right? But the way to think about it here is the thinking frame or the model that you need to adopt is these are different conditions or criteria that need to be tested in order for me to answer the question whether to enter the market or not, right? So that's how you should think about a structure. Not I want to look at X, I want to look at Y, I want to look at Z, right? Because when a candidate tells me I want to look at X, Y, Z, it's not clear how by looking at X, Y, and Z will you be able to answer the question, right? That linkage is a lot of people fail to establish that particular linkage, all right? So that's why consider the structure as the key areas of investigation, right? That when answered, right, you will be able to answer the overarching question, right? Now let's as we go through this particular presentation, right, what I encourage you to do is that put your questions in the chat, and intermittently I'll be looking at the chat and I will be answering those questions. That's one, right? Second, as we go through the drills, I would love if some of you can contribute, right? So we will pause, and you say to take some time to structure, and then you can communicate or verbalize your structure, right? Because it's a large audience, maybe I'll not be able to ask each and every one of you to verbalize your structure, but would love if anybody could volunteer, right? Now, let me before we get into structuring, right, there is a key precondition, right, to have a more robust framework or a structure, right, and that pertains to the opening of the case, right? So when the interviewer is presenting the problem statement to you, right, the first thing that you should be doing is listening actively, right? I like to tell my mentees that when the problem prompt is being presented to you, listen as if your life depends on it, right? Because active listening is something which is critical, that is assessed in consulting case interviews, right? So listen, take appropriate notes, don't write everything, focus on the key information, the key questions specifically, right? And then recap the information that the interviewer has presented to you in your own words, right? So try to paraphrase it, don't repeat it verbatim, right? Because when you paraphrase it, you are also confirming your understanding with the interviewer, right? And then finally confirm the key questions. What I like to do is that I like to recap, put it in my own words, and then specifically align with the interviewer. What is it that they want me to answer, right? Do they want me to answer, should we acquire this company or not? Do they want me to answer, does this technology license acquisition make sense? So the key question, all right, you will have to underline and align with the interviewer, right? So this is the first necessary precondition, right? You need to get a good grasp of the problem prompt or the case question, right? The second thing you should be doing is clarifying the client objective, right? Now the objective, right, or the metric becomes your north star, right? um, I take the same example that I took earlier, right, which is, let's say the question is about, should we enter this particular market, right? First thing you should be doing is asking, why do we want to enter the market? What is the success criteria, right? If the interviewer tells you the success criteria is profit, right, then the way to think about it here is, I will enter the new market if it is a profitable venture, right? If I'm able to meet the profit goal, right? If the objective is not profit and something else, let's say market share or let's say revenue growth, right, then that metric, right, achievement of that metric becomes my goal, right? So I will enter this new market if the revenue goal, the revenue growth target is met, right? Or if the market share penetration that we have laid out, right, or we have aligned on, that is met, right? So objective is your north star, right? So always understand the objective with the interviewer, align the objective with the interviewer in the beginning itself, right? Even if you think, or if you have or the interviewer, let's say, has even specified to you in the case from that the objective is profit, still I would recommend aligning with the interviewer, right? Because it's so critical, right? Because the entire 30 minutes will be focused on using the objective as a north star, right? The other thing that you should be doing is, a lot of times the metric or the objective is not universally defined, right? For example, something like improve productivity, right, or improve, let's say, ROI, right? Because these metrics are not universally defined, right? There's no common, let's say, way to determine productivity, or a common way to look at ROI. I would always align with the interviewer. How does the client define ROI? How does the client define productivity, right? So not only understand the conceptual objective, but also the operational metric that measures the objective, right? Another example I can give is customer satisfaction, right? So if the objective is to improve customer satisfaction, I would align with the interviewer. How does the client measure customer satisfaction, right? And then I would try to get information related to the target value and the timeline of the objective, right? So if the goal is to improve profit, I would ask by how much and within what time frame, right? The interviewer may not give me that information, right? But it's always good to ask in the beginning, right? Because if there is a specific target value, right, then my entire analysis will orient around meeting that target value, right? So very important to initially itself understand the objective, right? The conceptual objective, right, in the form of, let's say, a profit, productivity, market share, right? But also, if the metric, if the objective is not universally defined, the operational metric that measures that objective, right? And finally, the value and the timeline, right, that we need to strive for, right? Then I would, the third precondition is clarifying the case context, right? By case context here, I mean, the first thing is how the business really works, right? Um, if the business is about selling candies, right, I would ask, whom are we selling it to, right? Is it selling it to retailers and supermarkets, or are we selling it to directly consumers, right? If the business is a subscription based business, right, I would ask, okay, how is the client really making money? Is it a user subscription that he makes, or does he have any other revenue sources, like for example ads, right? So very uh, good to understand in the beginning itself, right? How the client is making money, right? How the client operates his business, right? If it's a non-commercially oriented business, like a not-for-profit entity, right? I would try to understand what are the sources of funds and the uses of funds, right? Where do we use these funds that we get from, and how do we get these funds, right? From donations or through other means or through grants, right? And the second thing I'll do is that clarify any unclear business term, any industry jargon, right? That is specified in the case form that I don't understand, right? A lot of times when I have been in, because before I started coaching, right, with Bain, I had interviewed hundreds of people, right? Oftentimes what candidates will do is that they will think that if we ask um, clarification for a particular business term or an industry jargon, right, that would the interviewer would imply that we do not have enough understanding of business acumen, right? But uh, that's not true, right? Rather, if you do not ask for clarification in the beginning, right, and you assume a particular understanding, and then you navigate based on it, and later you realize that this term does not mean what you understood it to be, right? Then you would have derailed your entire case analysis, right? Just because you didn't have the maturity to ask upfront, what does this really mean, right? Also, case interviews are not a test of your knowledge, right? They are typically, right, in a generalist career path, right? If you're applying for a generalist career path at an entry level or a mid level, right, they are not testing your knowledge in a particular industry, right? Unless you're applying for a specific domain based role or a specific expertise based role, right? They're not testing your industry knowledge or any functional topic knowledge, right? They are assessing your problem solving, right? How you think and how you communicate, right? So your and that's why the cases tend to be industry agnostic, right? And because you're not assessing your industry knowledge, right, you could clarify at the start itself, right, if there is any unclear terminology, right? And finally, the problem scope, right? The problem scope, I mean, let's say for example, if there are certain growth um, initiatives that you need to assess, right? I could clarify at the beginning itself with the interviewer, right? Are we looking at domestic expansion, or are we looking at, let's say, international expansion too, right? Because if the interviewer tells me don't focus on international, just focus on domestic, that's where the client is interested in, I can eliminate a lot of my branches of the issue tree or the structure, right? So always clarify any unclear problem scope in the beginning, right? So let me take a pause here, right, and check with you any questions, right, related to these particular preconditions that I just shared with you. um, yeah, I think there are a couple of questions. Let me answer them before we move forward. um, I think so one of you is asking the difference between the client's success criteria and understanding what the client's target value are, right? So success criteria would mean the metric, right? It could be profit, market share, or productivity. The target value would mean, what is the profit goal, right? Specifically, right? In value terms, right? So for example, is the goal to achieve $100 million increase in profit, right? Or is the goal to achieve a 10% market share increase, right? So that specific value, right, is what I was referring to, right? Um, Okay, so yeah, so that's it. So any other question? Yeah, so I think there's one more question here. Yeah, so I think that's a very good question here, that one of you has asked, Cynthia has asked, right? Thanks for asking that. Now, data oriented questions, right, in the clarifying step, right, are not the right questions to ask at this stage, right? Because understand that clarifying questions are meant to understand the problem. Let me underline the word understand the problem, right? It's not meant to start solving the problem, right? You start solving the problem after you have laid out your problem solving approach or structure, right? That's when you start problem solving, right? The problem with asking data oriented questions in the clarifying step is once you ask data oriented questions and you get some data, right, one, you're not asking it in a very organized manner, right? uh, if you had laid out your structure and then asked for information, you could have been more organized, more structured, you will appear more structured. Here you're just throwing some questions at the interview and asking for random data, right? Because you're not laid out your approach, right? That's one, right? The second problem is once you get this data from the interviewer, right, you cannot run any analysis because you have not laid out your problem solving framework, right? So I would recommend against asking for data oriented questions, right? Also, um, what a case interview is trying to do is it's trying to simulate a client conversation, right? And just imagine yourself being in a client setting, right? If as a consultant I ask for data from the client, right, the client will expect me to do something with that data, right, or give some synthesis or analysis of that data, right? I will not ask for data with the client and then say, okay, let me think about an approach and come back to you, right? It doesn't seem logical, right? I would first lay out my approach and then ask for data, right? Because now I know what data I need, right? That is more logical, right? So that's what I would do, right? um, and then there are some more questions. The other question somebody is asking is there a right or wrong way to approach a case? Does the conclusion need to be a specific correct solution, right? There isn't a right or wrong way, right? There are better ways, right, to navigate a case, right? But there is no wrong way, right, to navigate a case, right, or approach a case, right? um, so they're not expecting a specific correct conclusion, right, but they are expecting you to be insightful, right, in terms of the rationale that you're providing, right, and you should be able to defend the rationale, right? You should be able to have some quantitative analysis backing those recommendations, right? And somebody's asking, would it be more appropriate to ask for more information about the market of relevance, example dynamics, competition, customer, to gain more understanding about the market, right? So Vanessa, I wouldn't ask these questions in the clarifying step, right? I will ask these questions once I've laid out my approach, right? Because it all depends on the case question, right? If the case question warrants my investigation into these areas, right, I would lay out them in my approach and then ask for this information in an organized manner, right? If you ask these questions in the clarifying step, it seems that you're just fishing for data, right? You do not have any organized way of asking for information, right? And remember, the case interview is a test of your logical problem solving, right? How structured you are, right? How organized you are, right? So if you ask for data in a very disorganized manner, right, the immediate impression that goes is, you are not very structured in terms of your problem solving process, right? And a lot of candidates have a mistaken view, right? A mistaken notion that, you know what, um, once I structure, only then the case evaluation starts, right? Clarifying questions are don't count in case evaluation. I don't know why people got this impression, right? But a case interview assessment starts as soon as the interviewer begins with giving you the problems prompt, right? Don't assume that um, clarifying questions don't count, right? Clarifying questions are not considered by the interviewer for your assessment, right? The kind of clarifying questions that you will ask, right, will also be considered for assessment, right? Because the entire thing is a simulation, right? They will be taking a lens of how will the client perceive you asking these kind of clarifying questions, right? Um, so the other question that I'm getting is, so they are asking, McKinsey case interviews are more interviewer led, and Bain and BCG, you should be more in depth with your sub points within each bucket you present in a framework. What are your inputs on this? Right. Be it a McKinsey interview or a Bain or BCG interview, or for that matter, any other consulting interview, right? The way you approach case structuring should not change, right? Um, Now, McKinsey case interviews tend to be more interviewer-led leaning, right? And Bain and BCG more interviewee-led, right? But there is, so don't think of it as extreme, right? It's always a spectrum, right? I have had because I work with a lot of mentees, right? I have listened firsthand to the interviews that they've had with McKinsey, right? And I've also interviewed in McKinsey, right? It's always a spectrum, right? So you will find McKinsey interviewers, right, who will let the candidate, right, suggest areas of prioritization and involve the candidate, right, more, and you will also find Bain and BCG interviewers, right, who will be more proactive in terms of telling the candidate which area to focus on, right? It's never an extreme, right? It's never that McKinsey is interviewer led and Bain and BCG is interviewee led. It doesn't happen in in real interviews, right? It's always a spectrum, right? You could find either in both these firms, right? So don't go with this defined impression, right? But on average, McKinsey interviews are interviewer led leaning, right, while Bain and BCG would be candidate led leaning, right? um, but that should not change how you approach case structuring, right? A case structure is the key areas of investigation that will help you efficiently answer the case question, right? So irrespective of the format of the interview, the structure will not change, right? The second thing is in terms of depth, right? I think because I coach every month, I'm taking in so many mentees, right? So when we start coaching, right, one of the mistaken notions that a lot of people have is I should give a very detailed structure, right? Maybe people have this notion that they should speak for, let's say, 7 or 8 minutes, right, where they cover every aspect, right? So a lot of them memorize every like maybe 8 or 10 buckets and sub buckets, right, in each branch, right, and then they just download everything or just relay everything to the interviewer, right? But then if you do that, right, you're struck. So the impression is you're not prioritizing, right? You're just giving everything under the sun, right? That could be investigated, right? So that's not an efficient problem solving approach, right? So yeah, so I hope I've answered the key questions, right? But broad themes that are coming out, right, and let me answer them. One is you shouldn't be asking a lot of data oriented questions in the clarifying step, right? If this data oriented question is meant to understand the problem better, that's fine, right? But I wouldn't ask many data oriented questions. I would ask them after I've laid out my structure, and then now I can ask them in a more organized manner, right? And the second theme that is coming out is interviewer led and interviewee led, right? Uh, think of it as a spectrum, right? Don't go with the impression that it will be one way or the other, right? And the key structuring shouldn't change, right? It is, irrespective of the format, the way you approach structuring should be similar, right? And the third question that I got was about the conceptual metric, right? The success criteria. So target value, what I was referring to is an absolute value, right? So let's move forward now, right? Let's talk about what makes an above the bar structure, right? There are four key pillars, right, for an above the bar structure, right? The first pillar is being objective driven, right? Um, so what objective driven means here is, um, if the question is about should we acquire this company, right, and the objective is, let's say, to increase my market share penetration, right? My entire analysis, whether we should acquire or not, will depend on if I'm improving my market share penetration, if I'm meeting my market share penetration goal, right? So that is being objective driven, right? um, the analysis focus, if I already know my north star objective, right, I shouldn't be deviating, right? I shouldn't be focusing on, okay, is it helping me improve profit, is it helping me improve, let's say, some other metric, right? Let's say customer, customer satisfaction, right? My focus will be on market share penetration increase, because that is my objective, that is my success metric, right? So focus on the success metric, right, by aligning it early with the interviewer, right? The second is being MECE, right? So MECE, very simply put, right, is the areas of investigation, right, or the analysis areas that you list, right, to the interviewer. You should minimize the overlap between each branches, right? Because in consulting firms, if you have overlap in your analysis, right, it's expensive, right? For example, imagine I was a manager at Bain, let's say, and I had a, let's say, two analysts working with me, right? In Bain parlance, it was associates, right? So I had two associates working with me, and I give one associate a certain task, right, a certain work stream, right? And and there's an overlap, right, in that works in the work stream that I give to associate B, right? For example, associate A is running a market sizing for a particular product, and I gave the same market sizing to associate B, right? If these two people are working on the same thing, right, the firm is losing money, right? Because what you're selling is the time of the consultant, right? So analysis overlap is expensive for a consulting firm, right? So you should avoid any analysis overlap, right? So the areas of investigation should be mutually exclusive, right? Independent, right? And the second thing is that it should aim to answer the problem in its entirety, right? It will never be collectively exhaustive. You cannot expect that you will be 100% collectively exhaustive, right? That's not feasible, it's not practical, right? But at least you should be aiming to cover at least 80% of the problem, right? There will still be extraneous factors, right, that you will not look at because it doesn't impact the problem solution to that a great a degree, right? But you should be looking to cover at least 80% of the problem, right? So that's what MECE really means in practical terms, right? That's why firms use MECE framework extensively, right? Because they don't want analysis overlap, right? It's expensive for a consulting firm, and they would want to at least answer the question or the problem, right? To a great degree, at least 80% of the problem statement should be covered, right? um, the third thing is customization, right, which is if you are applying the same framework, right, to let's say cost optimization for an e-commerce company as well as cost optimization for a, let's say, a non-profit or a not-for-profit entity, right, then they're not being customized enough, right? um, a good way to customize would be to when you disaggregate the problem, right, in the problem disaggregation part, if you use the business context, right, well, right, for example, if I'm selling candies, right, I could look at the number of products I'm selling, right, and let's say the frequency of purchase, right? If I'm but if I'm selling user subscription, let's say I'm Spotify and I'm selling user subscriptions, the better way to disaggregate would be the number of customers and subscription per customer, right, or subscription per member, right? So then your disaggregation becomes more customized, right? And the fourth thing is have a hypothesis, right? There should be a hypothesis embedded within your structure, right? That's why when a candidate tells me I want to look at X, right, there is no specific hypothesis there, right? There's nothing you're testing there, right? When you tell me I'm looking at X, right, what are you testing? It's not clear, right? And let me give you one more example, right? So I was giving this case about should we launch this new product or not to a candidate or to a mentee, right? And he started with saying that I want to look at the product features, right, or the features of the new product that we're introducing, right? Now this is not being hypothesis driven, right? Because by looking at the features of the product, how will it tell you whether we should launch this product or not, right? But if he had told me, right, that I want to analyze the features of this new product and whether it meets the needs or wants of my target customer segment, right? Now, this is being hypothesis driven. There's a clear test embedded in your analysis, right? It's very clear to me what are you trying to test for, right? So that is being hypothesis driven, right? So in your structure, in your areas of investigation, right, you should be talking about what are you testing for, right? What hypothesis you're trying to validate, right? So these are the four key pillars, right? So being objective driven, right? Focus on the success metric. Second, being MECE, right? Minimizing analysis overlap and trying to cover the problem, right? To a great extent of the problem at least. Third is being customized, right? Not being generic, not applying the same framework to every potential industry context, right? And fourth is being hypothesis driven, right? So there should be a test embedded in the analysis that you're recommending, right? Now, let's take an example case prompt, right, to illustrate this, right? Let's say you're working for a mid-sized consulting firm, right, and you've received, and let's say you've received a job offer from a rival consulting firm, right? So, and you're considering whether to accept this job offer or not, right? How would you evaluate this decision? Right? The question is, there is a job offer. Should I take up this new job offer or not? Right? That is my overarching question, right? Because that is my overarching question, right? I can think of how do I break down this main question, should I take up this job offer, into key sub questions, right? And the way to think about it here is, if I'm able to answer the sub questions, right, I will be able to answer the main question, right? The combination of answers to the sub question will lead me to answer the main question. That's how you can think about it, right? Um, so should I take up this job offer, right? This main question, right? I can break it down into a set of sub questions, right? um, and those set of sub questions maybe can come from the clarifying question that I asked the interviewer, that is, what does success mean for you, right? Why are you looking to change your job, right? Is it purely from a financial basis that you're looking to change, or do you want better work life balance, or are there any other goals, right? So based on what the interviewer tells me, right, I can focus more on that particular goal or particular requirement that I have, right? So let's say I break down this main question into key sub questions, right? Right. So the sub questions could be the career growth aspect, right? The personal life aspect, the financial aspect, right? And if there are potential risks I can mitigate and manage well, right? So if the interviewer tells me that my reason for taking a new job is primarily to improve my financial position, right, then this area, right, will be the priority for me. This is my primary analysis, right? And then the others could be secondary analysis or secondary aspects, right? Which could influence my decision, right? For example, financially, if it makes sense for me, right? But let's say from a career perspective, right, it is not good for me to take up this particular job, and in long term, right, I would suffer financially, right? Then I would not take up this job offer, right, even though my financial sense is met, right? So that's how you can think about it, right? Once I've laid out my key sub questions, right, I will break it down into what are the analysis I will run, right, to answer the sub questions, right? So, for example, in order to answer whether the new job is better for my career or not, right, I would have certain key subsequent sub questions or more disaggregated areas, right? For example, the growth opportunities that this new job offers, right? How aligned it is to my long-term career goals, the area that I want to, let's say, specialize in or become an expert in, right? Are these new skills relevant to my future goals, right? The way I want my career to turn out, right? So this particular sub question, right, I've further broken it down into the other analysis oriented sub questions, right? Which when answered, I can answer whether the job is better for my career or not, right? The same thing with personal life, right? You could look at what are the areas that constitute um, um, being better for my personal life, right? It could be work life balance, it could be commute, it could be, let's say, alignment with my personal values, right? If I'm somebody who values sustainability oriented work, right? Maybe it is better for me because it is aligned with my values, so therefore I get more satisfaction, more joy of from that work, right? And therefore it's better for my personal life, right? And the same thing with financial aspect, right? I can break it down into what constitutes a job being better financially. It could be the salary, direct remuneration that I get, but it could also be the benefits and the perks that this particular job could provide to me, right? Long-term financial prospects could be something like an ESOP or let's say stock units that the firm or the company is giving me, right? That could help me generate or give me opportunities for wealth generation, right? Um, so this is how you can actually think of a structure, right? Now let's look at the four pillars that we identified, right? The first pillar we talked about is it should be objective driven, right? So in order to keep it objective driven, what I recommend is always start with the key question and always align the objective with the interviewer, right? What should we prioritize? Should we prioritize financial assessment, or should we prioritize, let's say, the career growth aspect, right? What is important, right? And make that your primary assertion, right? Then the second thing is MECE, right? So if you look at the sub questions that I've laid out, there isn't much overlap, right? The financial assessment is independent of, let's say, my personal life assessment, right? Or work life balance assessment, right? So always break it down into minimal overlap, independent drivers, right? Also, collectively, it is you could say answering the problem in entirety, right? As I said, it should be it'll never be 100% messy, right? Focus on being it at least 70 to 80% collectively exhaustive, right? Third is it's customized, right? It is not generic, right? Yeah. I cannot apply this problem solving framework to any other question at all, right? It is very customized to this particular question, which is, should I take up this new job offer or not, right? And all these sub questions, for example, right? Um, are trying to answer this particular question, right? This is a very customized structure, right? And finally, it's hypothesis driven. There's a test built in, right? um, is the salary increase significant, right? I can test it, right? So last, what is my current salary, what is my new salary, what is the increase, right? There's a clear test, right? um, um, if I had a sub question like, am I happy with the salary, right? If I ask, if I make this question, am I happy with the salary, it's not very clearly hypothesis driven, right? There's no test, right? Happy, when you say, am I happy with the salary, right? You cannot, there's no specific hypothesis to validate or refute, right? So always make it hypothesis driven, right? Have a test embedded in your question, right? So this is how you can actually formulate a problem solving approach, right? That meets the bar, right? That is objective driven, that is logical, right? That is MECE, that is customized to the particular industry or the business context, and which is hypothesis driven, there is clear analysis or tests built in your structure, right? Now let's take some example, um, do some drills, right? But before we get into drills, right, I would like to offer some conceptual framework of how to look at structures, right? Because and this is something that I teach my mentees in the first few days itself, right? Because although so far I told you that a structure should be logical, should be messy, custom, and it should be hypothesis driven, right? So many different um, criteria I laid out to you what makes a good structure, right? But you need to acknowledge that in an actual interview, right, you'll just have 2 minutes, right, to come up with a structure, right? um, if it was a client business and we were coming up with an approach to solve that particular client question, we will have more time in an actual consulting engagement, right? You'll have more time to come up with an approach, right? So because there is paucity of time, there is a limited amount of time that you need to come up with a structure, right? um, the, a lot of people, what they do is that they will resort to memorizing buckets and sub buckets, right? And then applying those standard buckets and sub buckets to the case structure, right? Some of you might memorize a specific framework for a specific question, like if there's a market entry framework, M&A framework, or so many different other frameworks, right? But what I would recommend is First, consider what is the question, right? What is the case question about, right? Is it a strategic decision, right? Is it something like, should we enter this new market? Should we acquire this company, right? Should we um, invest in this new technology, right? Is it a decision, right, that you are helping the client make, right? So if it's a decision that you're helping the client make, right, the approach that you will need to take is, what are the criteria or the conditions that need to be met in order to make this decision, right? And then come up with how to test, right, whether those conditions are met or not, right? For example, if the question about is about, should we enter this new market, one of the criteria could be, is the market attractive, right? And then I could formulate an analysis to assess whether the market is attractive or not, right? That could involve assessing what is the overall size of the market, right? What is the competitive landscape? Do we have any differentiated proposition, right, in order to succeed in this particular market, right? So that becomes my market attractiveness test, right? Similarly, I would have financial viability test or maybe operational feasibility test, right? But essentially, it's a set of conditions, right, that I will need to analyze and test for in order to make the decision, should we enter the market or not, right? So those are strategic decisions for you, right? So there is a specific overarching decision, right, which I will make, or which I will tell the client should make only if the conditions are met, right, or the criteria are met, right? The second thing is diagnosis, right? So there could be a problem wherein the interviewer is telling you that the client has suffered profit loss. We don't know why this has happened, so he wants you to first diagnose why this has happened, and then outline measures and strategies, right? In that case, and this could be in the form of, let's say, profit drop, or it could become, it would come in the form of, my costs have gone up, I don't know why my costs have gone up, help me diagnose why my costs have gone up, and then outline measures, right? Or it could be an e-commerce company that has seen an uptick in the delivery time, right? Here, what you should be focusing on is, what is the focus metric, right? What is the the key metric that we are focusing on analysis on? Is it profit, is it cost, is it delivery time, right? And once you have that metric, you disaggregate, right? You deconstruct, right? You break it down into a quantitative tree, you could say, right? um, because rather than focusing my analysis at the profit level, right, if I break down profit into, let's say, revenue, cost, and further drill down into, let's say, different segments of revenue or different cost components, and I get a more granular metric, right? Let's say I start with profit, I do a quantitative drill down, I do a top down diagnosis, and I'm able to identify that it's labor cost that has gone up, right? And specifically, and I'm able to identify that actually the increase in headcount is causing the profit drop, right? I now have a more granular numerical issue, right? That increase in headcount, right? Increase in staff is causing the profit drop, right? Then I can run some hypothesis test on why we have seen an increase in staff. Is it because of certain regulatory rules, right, that have been introduced, because of which we need to do more, let's say, certain regulatory activities? Or is it because we have eliminated certain automation, right, and therefore we need more manual staff, more manual work, and therefore we need more staff, right? So in a diagnosis question, right, you start with the main metric, you disaggregate, identify the more granular numerical issue. Once I have that, I can run some hypothesis and come up with why it's happening. And then finally, based on the why, I can outline measures, right? If the increase in labor cost is due to, let's say, elimination of certain automation, right, our measures or strategies could focus on, how can we bring back some of the automation, right? How can we automate certain activities, right? um, Third archetype, right? I think I've not numbered it correctly, but the third archetype tends to be generating ideas, right? For example, it could be about revenue growth, it could be about reducing cost, right? So here in the idea generation aspect, right, the client is not asking us to diagnose, right? The client is just asking us, for example, he might just tell us, help me increase my revenue, right? He doesn't want us to do a backward diagnostic and see why his revenue growth has not been 10% and why it has been only 3%. He's just asking us, help me increase my revenue and help me grow by 10% year over year, right? So in which case the focus is more on how do we help him grow, right? How do we help him optimize that particular metric, right? That metric could be revenue, right? Or that metric could be something like an employee turnover, right? Help me reduce my employee attrition, right? So there is no backward diagnostic that we're running, right? We are just helping him lay out some ideas, initiatives, and then assess which initiatives we should prioritize, right? So in this case, you deconstruct the metric and then you generate ideas, right? And then you evaluate feasibility of those ideas, right? uh, I'm sure you have a lot of questions, right? Let me see if there are other questions that are coming up. But what I want to spend time on is do conduct a drill, right? I just want to give a question to you and see how you structure this particular problem, right? Let me answer one question that has come up. Let's say I do not know what is an AI auditing firm and the accounting assurance auditing industry at all. How to be customized and hypothesis driven, right? So here, if there is any unclear aspect about the industry, you could clarify it, right, with the with the interviewer, right? And here, if it's about an auditing firm, right, at the end of the day, it will have customers, right? It customers who want audit services, and it will have certain fee that you will be they will be paying you, right? And if audit is typically an annual audit, right, I mean, you could say it'll primarily focus on how many companies or customers are coming to you for audit services, right? And how much are you charging for these audit services? Or it could also be certain products that you're offering, right? It could be a full service audit that you're offering, or it could be, let's say, a specific area of auditing, right? So it could be about different products that you offer, right? um, and then, okay, so let me take the time now to give you a particular drill, right, and see how you formulate a problem solving approach to this, right? So let's take this drill. Culinary Craft, a leading online cooking education platform popular among home cooks, it's considering acquiring a smaller rival, Gourmet Guru, right? So the question is, should they acquire Gourmet Guru or not, right? So take 2 minutes, formulate a problem solving approach, right? And would love if some of you could share that in the chat window, and then we can discuss the solution. I think Jackie has a question. For the sub bucket, should we use questions or statements, right? um, Ideally, if it's question, I think there is a clear hypothesis embedded. But even if you use a statement, right, if that statement conveys clearly what is the hypothesis that you're testing, it should be fine, right? For example, I said market attractiveness, right? I could have also said, is the market attractive, right? Rather than saying market attractiveness, right? Anybody wants to share how they would decide, how they would approach this particular question? Yeah, thanks for sharing, Miles. Miles is sharing. He removed it. Maybe sharing it again. Yeah, sure. So objective, you can assume, Tanvi, they want to increase their profits, right? The goal is profit improvement. Yeah, so I think Jackie is sharing financial due diligence of GG, right? Gourmet Guru, competitive advantage of Gourmet Guru, risks, and the online cooking market outlook, right? Okay, that's a good initial areas of investigation, right? I think yeah, the others sharing also, like Sidhya is sharing strategic fit, synergies, right? Yeah, I think synergies is a very important consideration in acquisition, and risks, right? Integration will preserve the brand or not, right? And I like what I like the framing, right? So the that you have, you're saying, does it justify the cost, right, of buy versus build, right? So this is good, right? So thanks for sharing, Sidhya. Um, so Vanessa is saying attractiveness of GG, synergies, financial considerations, alternatives, and risks, right? Yeah. So and Pulkita, is there a certain timeline they're looking at, right? So you can assume there's no specific timeline. It's as soon as possible. We need to make a decision whether we should acquire or not, right? Right. So I think Armin is sharing competitors' revenue target with the new segment. Okay, great. Let me get into how I would have kind of approached this particular question. Right. So what I've done is that first you start with the key question at the top, right, of your issue tree, right, and then you break it down. You disaggregate it into because it's a strategic decision here, right? That's why I went through the archetypes, right? It's a strategic decision question. There is a decision that we are helping the client to make, should you acquire or not, right? So I will disaggregate it into three criteria, right? What are those three criteria that, or three or four criteria that need to be met in order for us to answer this question, all right? The four criteria that I can come up with is, one is the professional chef market, because remember, Gourmet Guru is catering to professional chefs, right, while Culinary Craft is catering to home chefs, right, based on the case prompt, right? Again, you can clarify it with the interviewer, right? But we know it's two different markets, right? Or at least different segment within within the overall market, right? So is the professional chef, right, learning market attractive, right? Will we recoup the investment cost within 5 years, right? So this is the financial assessment, right? And here, let's say you have confirmed with the interviewer that the goal is to get back the purchase price within 5 years, right? So then we have a clear financial assessment to work with, right? Then the third could be strategic fit, and the fourth could be, do we have capabilities and can we manage risks, right? Then I will break this down, right, this sub questions, right, into more specific analysis steps, right? um, in order to assess whether the market is attractive, I will look at size, growth, profitability, right? So primarily we're trying to understand, is it a large market, is it growing, is it a very profitable market to be in, right? Is it high margin, right? Do the players have high margins, right? Also the landscape, right? Competitive landscape, some of you did share this aspect, competitive landscape, specifically in the professional chef market, right? And does Gourmet Guru have certain unique selling proposition from a, let's say, product perspective, or from a customer experience perspective, right? Is the product attractive, right? um, and then the financial assessment, I can clearly lay it out as a viability test, right? So essentially what we're trying to assess is the incremental profit that I will make on acquiring Gourmet Guru, right? So there is a standalone profit that we will get, right, once we have this target. But there is also the synergies, right? There could be revenue synergies, because the revenue might increase because of let's say a combined go to market or a combined customer base to target, right? There could also be cost synergies because we could optimize certain overheads, optimize, let's say, tech cost, right? And therefore, the standalone plus synergies will give me an additional incremental profit, right? And that over 5 years should exceed my investment cost, right? Primarily, investment cost here we're referring to the purchase price as well as a one-time integration cost, right? Third would be the fit, right? From a fit perspective, what we're trying to understand is the product offering complementary, right? What I mean by that is, um, if my product offering is exactly the same, if our product offerings is exactly the same, right, there is no synergy uplift, right? But if it's different, right, and if I'm getting access to a new customer base, right, then I can sell these new product features to my existing customer base, right? So to my existing culinary craft customers, I can sell new offerings, right, that I'm getting from Gourmet Guru, as well as my current culinary craft offerings I can sell to Gourmet Guru's customers, right? So there's complementarity, right? So and third, second is the brand synergy, right? So if there is synergy in the two brands, right? For example, if culinary craft is perceived as, let's say, let's say Gourmet Guru has these niche high-end cooking techniques, right? That once acquired, right, it enhances the brand of culinary craft, right? Then from a synergy perspective, it makes sense, right? We are elevating the brand image, right? And finally, do you have the capabilities, right? Capabilities could come in the form of, let's say, cultural fit, right? Is it easy to integrate these two new technologies, right? Because each of them are online cooking platforms, right? So they might be working on different tech platforms, right? Is it easy to unify them, right? Is it easy to integrate in the form of culture, in the form of, let's say, realizing different synergies, be it cost synergies or revenue synergies, right? And finally, the assessment of risk, right? Which is, are there any operational risks? So operational risk could be in the form of, let's say, once we acquire, right, and we have certain plan of synergy realization, right? But when we start implementing, we realize it will take more time, right, to realize the synergies than what we initially planned for. That's an operational risk, right? um, and there could be market risk in the form of, let's say, a demand shift, right? It's possible in the next few years the market for professional chefs, right, might go down, right? So there is a demand shift or there is a supply shift, right? More new competitors coming into the professional chef market, right? So all these are risks that you could assess, right? So this is how you could approach a strategic decision case, right? Which is, there are certain um, um, criteria or conditions to test, right? And then we look at what kind of analysis areas you would investigate to test these different criteria, right? I'll quickly cover our diagnosis, right? Because I think we are short of time, so I'll quickly cover the diagnosis part, right? So let me take the example of Serene Stays, right? A boutique hotel chain, right? They have 12% market share. They've had strong revenue, right? But their margins are low, right? Compared to the other competitors, right? So your task is to identify why Serene Stays is less profitable and suggest ways to boost their margins to match those of their competitors, right? So this is the question, right? So the question is, why is our margin, right, less relative to competition, right? And how can we boost it, right? This is a diagnostic because there is a clear why being asked, right? Why is the margin lower compared to competition, right? So firstly, we will need to diagnose, right? Why are we lagging in terms of margin compared to competition, right? So the way I would recommend to approach this is, you start with the diagnosis, right? You start with disaggregating profit, right? So the margin, right, you could disaggregate it into a profit tree, right, and drill down to isolate the granular numerical issue, right? Once you have isolated the quantitative driver, right, granular quantitative driver, then you can investigate the underlying reason or root cause, right? So you ask, let's say, how and why questions, right? More targeted questions to understand why this particular quantitative driver has turned negative, or what has led to the negative development of this quantitative driver, right? And finally, once you understand the root cause, you can come up with measures and strategies, right? So what I will do is that I will disaggregate profit, right? So let's say I disaggregate profit of Serene Stays, At the highest level, we could disaggregate it by, let's say, revenue and cost, right? And then further, we disaggregate revenue by daily rate, right, of a room, and the occupancy. Cost you can disaggregate by different cost components, right? Um, Now, what I have laid out to you is how you can, more efficiently, right, traverse this tree, right? So what I will do is that I will disaggregate it into revenue and cost, and I will compare with with the other competition, right? So I will ask the interviewer, right, in relative terms, right, how is our revenue per per hotel, right? Because it's a hotel chain, right? What is our revenue per unit compared to competition, right? To understand, are we lagging on revenue per unit, right, or revenue per room, let's say, right? To make the compare, to normalize the comparison, let's say revenue per room, right, and cost per room, right? If you're lagging on cost and not lagging on revenue, right, I don't need to further drill down on revenue, right, because I know revenue is not the issue, right? I can focus on cost per room then, right? And then when I disaggregate cost per room, I could disaggregate it into the different cost components, right? They could be labor, utilities, rent, F&B, right? And then here I will again do the comparison, right? How are we doing in terms of labor cost per room? How are we doing in terms of utilities cost per room, right? And then let's say if labor cost per room is the prioritized area, because this is seen as significant, uh, you know the relative underperformance is higher here, let's say, right? Then I will disaggregate further, right, to see if number of people or number of staff is causing the problem, or the staff cost, right, how much I pay to each staff is causing the problem, right? And here, let's say we have identified that it's the number of staff, right? So now I have a more granular quantitative driver, right? I don't need to uncover the root cause at the profit level, because I've done a quantitative drill down, right? I have this granular numerical issue, right? I can have lesser hypothesis to test now. I can ask more targeted questions, right? And let's say when we ask targeted questions, we discover this, right? We ask questions like, okay, is it because our operations are not streamlined that we need more staff? Is it because of lack of automation? Is it because of lack of training? Is it because of lack of skills, etc., right? And let's say we test these different hypotheses, and then we understand from the interviewer that automation is the core issue, right? Our We lack automation compared to our competition, right, compared to the peers that we are comparing our performance with, margin performance with, right? Then I have a clear root cause now, right? So all my measures and strategies will focus on how do I enhance automation, right? And enhancing automation could come in the form of implementing new technology, right, which can automate certain manual activities. It could come in the form of, let's say, we need to standardize a process in order to implement a technology, right? Because only when you standardize, you can maybe bring in technology, right, to automate it, right? So this way of approaching a diagnostic question, right, is much more efficient, right? Because first you start with the top down diagnosis to isolate the granular numerical issue, then you ask more targeted questions to investigate and uncover the root cause. Once you uncover the root cause, you can be more targeted in terms of the measures, right, to address the root cause, right? So this is a diagnostic question, right? And finally, when it comes to, let's say, the third archetype, which is, let's say, archetype about improving something or enhancing something, right? Let's say you have been retained by Indonesian government, and they want you to, let's say, improve the public transportation outcomes. First thing I will do is that understand from the interviewer, what does public transportation outcomes really mean, right? And let's say he tells me that the public transportation outcome means that the ridership of bus transport is what we need to improve, right? The number of people that use buses, right, we need to increase that, right? Once I know that, once I have a more clear concrete metric to work towards, right, work with, then I can use this to disaggregate, right? So how do I enhance transport ridership, right? And if I disaggregate this, right, increasing bus transport ridership, right, I can disaggregate this in terms of, if I improve infrastructure, right, if I add more buses, let's say, right, I can increase ridership. If I improve quality of the buses, I can increase ridership. If I improve the affordability, I can increase ridership. If I improve the experience of a bus user, I can increase ridership, right? So these are the disaggregated levers, you could say, right, that if influenced can improve the metric, right? And then I can come up with ideas to enhance these metrics, right? So improving infrastructure could come in the form of, let's say, new buses, could come in the form of let's say more coverage, right? So I could look at adding bigger buses, right, that increase my capacity. I could add buses in the areas that we don't operate in, right? So increasing the coverage, right? The service quality could come in the form of increasing frequency, right? Specifically peak hours, right, where it's difficult to get a bus, right, or the buses are crowded, I increase the number of buses in those peak hours, right? And I reduce the travel time by giving priority to bus lanes, right? Let's say I have specific lanes for buses, right? um, Affordability could come in the form of, one, you just reduce prices, right? You reduce fares, right? But also it could come in the form of, let's say, you offering certain passes, like monthly passes, student passes, or it could be come in the form of, let's say, more flexible payment options, right? User experience, simple things could be hygiene, right, safety, let's specifically in Indonesia, right? uh, if you introduce more CCTV cameras, that kind of increases the perception of security and safety. Hygiene could be in the form of just maintaining clean buses, right? um, so this is what I wanted to cover from a three archetype perspective, right? But just to summarize, right, what I wanted to cover is, if you are able to focus on what is the case question, right, is it a decision that we need to make, right, or is it a specific diagnosis? Do we need to identify why this problem has happened before coming with measures? Or third, is it about, how do I break down this problem, right, and help optimize a certain metric, increase revenue, reduce cost, improve delivery time, or in this case that we did, improve the bus transport ridership, right? Once you understand the case question, right, it becomes easier for you to disaggregate and come up with a more logical problem solving approach, right? um, Yes, this is an idea generation archetype. Yes, exactly. Yeah, thanks, Amin, for pointing it out. This is an idea generation archetype, right? So this bus transport ridership is an idea generation archetype, right? The what I did here for serene stays was a diagnosis archetype, right? First, we diagnosed, understood what is causing the problem, and then investigated the root cause, and then came up with measures, right? And finally, what we did in culinary craft was a strategic decision archetype, right? So this is the three main archetypes, right? The decision, right? Diagnosing and remedy, and the idea generation, right? Let me get into the questions, right? I know I did not give time for questions, so if there are any questions, would love to answer, right? So let me just go to the last slide and check with you if you have any questions that you have. Yeah. Any questions that you would have, right? Happy to answer those questions. uh, um, I think Lana is asking, where does the question of are our competitors' profits down come in before structuring, right? So Lana, I think so. This will depend on the prompt, right? In serene stays, the question itself was, why is our margin lower compared to competition? Right? That is the question we are tackling, right? Why is our margin low? Right? And that's why the focus was on that, right? Why is our margin performance relatively lower, right? So if the prompt is not related to why is a margin lower related to competition, I don't need to worry about this, right? Great. But I think I took a lot of yeah. So Alexandra, let me check with Leyland team, right? And I'll have to check with them and come back to you, right? But thanks a lot for for your time, right? And all the best in your preparation, and I'll keep having some of these free events. Would love to also have some of you again in some of these free events. Thanks a lot for your time.